Let's do that. Just a little kumbaya would be great.
I don't think you're on camera. I can't see you.
Well, they're just going to have to move their cameras. Is that possible, gentlemen? Camera folks? Is that okay? I don't mean to be difficult. I'm just regular. And the whole podium thing just kind of like, I'm not. Anyways, how did I get here? You know, pardon me?
Nothing was on TV then.
Well, how many people know about who my father was? Let's see some hands. Okay, how many people have heard on YouTube or wherever the little snippet of his deathbed confession? How many recognize this voice? I heard from Frank! Remember that? Oh, I tried to bring that on a USB key down here, but in the last 10 minutes I was tearing my room apart, and my wife was helping me tear it apart. Going, where is my USB key? My pink USB key that I have my father's little snippet on. We can't find it. Anyways, I thought I got that heard from Frank down pretty well, so the rest is history, because I didn't memorize what he said. But what he said was, generally speaking, some of the most shocking news that he had ever told me. Now, my father and I, despite our differences politically, for one thing, when he was working for the Nixon administration, we were, as a family, invited to attend some White House function. And I was in my militant hippie days, in my black armband, and I was down in the streets of Washington, D.C., protesting against the Vietnam War, which in retrospect was a good thing to do. And he was very pissed off at me about that. He goes, we're going to see the president, son. I'm like, you're going to see the president, Papa. I'm going to go down and protest. I can't have a son of mine protesting while I work for the president of the United States, son. I'm sorry, Papa, you're just going to have to deal with that somehow. Boy, we just went back and forth. It was not an easy relationship in those days. Not easy at all. But I persevered. I got my way. He got his way. And then the wounds started to heal. And we became, in the last 10 years of his life, very close. Here's my vodka and 7-Up. You know, I've been through a lot of crazy stuff with my family, and I don't know if that's why I drink. It's an excuse, it's a crutch, I don't know. I drink because I like the flavor of it, who knows? I don't know. I tried AA, I couldn't find any of the steps, so my brother said, well, AA is for quitters, and we don't, hunts don't quit. There was some kind of twisted logic in that. I'm not really sure what it was. It could have been just something that just kind of, came out of his brain in some inebriated state. Anyways, we went through hell together, doing all kinds of things that I won't mention because, check, 1, 2. We're being looked at right now, I'm sure, by NSA, CIA, FBI, SOB, whatever. And, I was 16 years old and I had traveled extensively by that time. Born in DC in '54, moved in 6 months to Japan, where coincidentally Lee Oswald was stationed in Atsugi. My dad was up in that area. First spoken language was Japanese, so by the time I got to Montevideo, Uruguay, where my father was CIA station chief there, I was already a pretty twisted individual, like, speaking Japanese and everybody else is speaking Spanish, but I went to a French school. So this was a planned torture that my parents wanted to put me through for some reason. I don't know what I did wrong, but here, you speak Japanese, we're going to move to a Spanish-speaking country for the next 4 years, and you're going to attend the Lycée Français. So that was a hardship, and I still couldn't figure out how to pay my dad back for that one. But when I was 16, I guess they felt I was mature enough to, hey, I see some friends here. All your friends, actually. They thought I had maturity, and they were wrong about that too, to tell me what in fact they really did for a living. my father primarily. My mother, her CIA experience pretty much tapered off, although she was still a contract agent and working in the various embassies of the host countries we live in, gathering intel that she was able to have the privilege of stealing or copying, and then giving it to my father as needed. So they were the classic CIA working couple. I think best portrayed by Brad Pitt and Angela Jolie. I don't know, there wasn't all the gun shooting in the house or any of that stuff, but the craziness was the same. Every 2 or 4 years we'd move, boom, we're moving. Oh, well, I'm just now learning Spanish, and I'm getting into my French, and I forgot my Japanese already. But then it was Mexico City, and then it was Argentina, and then it was Spain, then it was U.S. And so, by the time I really put roots down in this country, I had a really bad stuttering problem, because maybe my brain was going, well, what language is he going to be speaking now? And it just kind of stopped and stuttered. But at 16, my father sat me down and told me, son, the reason we move so much is because I work for the Central Intelligence Agency. I didn't think that sounded very intelligent, but I didn't even know what it meant. So he said it was kind of like the FBI, but in foreign countries. And I'm like, oh, okay, Papa, that's fine. So the State Department whole charade was just a cover. As much of our life had been a cover. And later in years, I realized that just about everything we did and were involved in, including the classic CIA couple, husband and wife, and I felt like we were children. We're just part of his cover. We don't really mean anything. Not really. I mean, we were a necessary part of providing that family image. And so that hurt a little, but. And so everything was quiet until about 1970 when my father left the CIA, and decided to go work for President Richard Nixon. And this was a big talk around our house. I'm going to go work for the president. And I've never seen my parents argue about anything, never. Never heard a mean tone, a raised voice. But in my basement room, which my father had constructed for me, this is one of the few father-son things we ever did. He constructed a windowless concrete bunker for me in the corner of the basement. And I'm like, it's black. Just, you turn the light out and you couldn't see your hand this close to your face. Thank you so much. I'm like down here. Everybody, the life of the house is upstairs, and I'm like downstairs, through the office, down through the laundry room, through the basement, beside the maid's room, all the way in the back corner. So I don't know if that was intentional or not, but he used to just love coming into my room at 6 o'clock in the morning with his trumpet, just practically kick my door open and like, rise and shine, up and at him, Saint. And I'm like, oh God, help. So we had a funny relationship. He really helped me with my music. And my feelings of solitude and loneliness. That was good. Taught me that it's okay to be holed up in a dark room in the corner with no windows, no sunshine, and that's okay. You're okay. It's all right. People do that. Okay. Maybe in the CIA when they've been caught, in Korea or something, they do that, but I don't know, in the USA. I have to look at my life in somewhat of a comical term, but getting down to more serious issues here, let's see. So I had never really heard my parents argue, but in 1970, my father and mother, because my bedroom was below theirs, I started hearing the fighting, the arguing, the bickering, and you could feel the whole house just under this incredible tension. And my mother was, number one, she was she was at the end of her rope with my father's infidelities. And this was something I knew nothing about until that time when my mother started confiding things in me. And the other issue was working for President Nixon. My father had promised after he retired from CIA that he would never again indulge himself into covert activities. He would not continue working undercover for any bureau. So that was the promise he made. And so when Charles Colson, President Nixon's counsel, and my father, who were both alumni from Brown University, got together, it was decided that President Nixon had work that was needed to be done in the White House, and this became the plumbers unit. But my mother was furious. She said, "Howard, you promised, you promised, you promised, you promised." Well, the president taps you on the shoulder. What are you supposed to do? Well, I guess you could say, "No thanks. I've given you 30 years of my life already. Time to spend a little time with my family." You know, he could have said that. But I think the big thing about CIA people is their egos. And this is the big thing about people in positions of power, is their egos. They've got to have this. My dad was like an adrenaline junkie. Instead of parachuting from planes or whatever, he wanted to overthrow countries. I mean, that's a normal ego, adrenaline junkie thing, right? You got to well, this week it's going to be Guatemala, or next week it's going to be Nicaragua. And let's see what countries are on the line for the next couple of years we need to overthrow. Send me there, and we'll get it done. So he was the CIA's #1 guy in the Guatemala project in 1957. He created the false radio. In the old days of radio when they used to have all the sound effects and all that stuff. Well, I can just see my dad with the microphone creating the sounds of planes and drums bobbing. He was probably rattling metal sheets of metal for thunder and going like this because they believed it. They thought there was a huge Air Force bombing, and the president ran. He booked. He split, and that country now fell to the United States. And so he was the go-to guy. So they put him in charge of the Bay of Pigs. Well, that didn't go so well. That wasn't as easy. They had miscalculated and they misread the veracity of the Cuban people to entertain another coup after they had spent years trying to get rid of Batista, who was a very corrupt Cuban politician in bed with the mafia and all kinds of things. And it's funny because a lot of the Watergate people came from that Bay of Pigs thing. Frank Sturgis was in charge of some of the casinos, picking up the money for Batista. Bernie Barker, also known as Macho, this guy you think could be like a full-time Santa Claus. He was short and dumpy, and he had just a very family-loving Catholic Christian guy. You'd never think he was head of Batista's secret police. So these are the people that were friends and used to come over to our home in Potomac when Watergate started building up to what it eventually became, which was just a huge mess, both nationally and for our family. And that was 1970. So throughout the 70 and 71, my dad was making trips, burglarizing Dr. Fielding's office down in Los Angeles. Considering ideas of murdering Jack Anderson, who was a columnist for the Washington Post, an investigative journalist that Nixon hated. So many things. Kidnapping prominent Democrats, feeding them LSD and putting them on a houseboat filled with hookers and two-way mirrors with, right, am I right? Yeah, with mirrors and film to blackmail them. It sounds just, what's wrong with that, Give me LSD and I'll go to a houseboat full of hookers, what's the problem with that? No, I'm totally kidding. But, and so they had this massive thing called the Gemstone Plan. It was all the jewelries, there was ruby, diamond, emeralds, sapphires, all the way down until they ran out of stones, and then they had the precious stones. And he and Gordon Liddy, who's one crazy guy, had developed all these points to infiltrate the Democratic Party. They were going to have chase planes follow the Democrat planes and eavesdrop while they were in the air. They were going to send their Cuban mercenaries to the Democratic Convention to disrupt things and all this stuff. So, I could see why that would sound like an attractive bunch of things for a guy like my dad to do, since what he'd been doing before for the CIA was basically that on a much larger scale. And so Watergate happened. He was arrested. turned himself in, actually. His crew, his team was arrested. James McCord, the 4 Cubans, and I believe Gordon Liddy surrendered as well at some time. My mother was in Europe at the time, in England, going on vacation with my sisters and my brother. I was alone at the house with my father. And rather than come barreling in my room at odd hours, blasting his trumpet, one morning in the wee hours, he shoved the door open, flicked on the light switch, and said, get up, get out of bed, meet me up in my bedroom, no questions. And I'm like, well, okay, something's happening here. He looked really upset about something. I didn't know what was going on. But I didn't ask any questions. So I went upstairs. He had these 2 large suitcases full of eavesdropping, camera, devices, wires, and all this kind of stuff. And he said, go in the kitchen, get some spray cleanser and some paper towels, and wipe everything down. We got to get rid of this stuff. I guess it's stuff he had brought back from the lookout station across from Watergate. Anyways, make a long story short, I cleaned it all up. He was on the phone making connections to do something for his team, which had been arrested. And we got in his green 71 Firebird and drove out to the canal locks, the C&O canal locks, and I helped him dump these suitcases into the water, which they probably are still there. Over the next couple of days, I helped him transfer money. I remember one assignment he gave me was meet him down in Georgetown, which is a little subdivision of Washington, D.C., and meet him at the Riggs Bank down there, and in the safety deposit room. So I did. And he produces a large manila envelope, a large one, stuffed with something. He goes, this is cash. I want you to stick it down the back of your pants here, cover it up with your jacket, and then take the longest twisted route back home that you can, because you're going to be being followed, more than likely. And I'm like, gulp. Keep an eye on the rearview mirror, and if you notice cars that are the same, just try to lose them. And I'm like, thinking, Papa, I'm a 17-year-old hippie with $250,000 stuffed down my pants, and I'm watching out for the FBI or whoever to follow me, and I'm supposed to lose them? This is not, I'm demonstrating against the war here. I'm not, this is not a spy thing for me. I'm not part of that. But who else was he going to rely on? And this actually was a wonderful thing, because it gave me the first opportunity in my life to do something that my father would be proud of. Right? Run, evade the government, hide the money. But he needed me, and it really was the first time I felt that I was actually doing something that he could count on, and I was going to do it. I didn't care. I didn't realize at the time that I could be arrested for being an accessory to one of the biggest political crimes in the history of the United States. But what's a kid to do, anyways? So I did all that. And for the next couple of days before my mom flew back, I helped him dispose of other evidence, typewriters and things. The famous typewriter that he wrote, I have a piece of lint on my lip here somewhere, or it's my mustache, I don't know. The typewriter that he wrote the DM cables, the forged DM cables, which implicated the John F. Kennedy in the assassination of Vietnamese President Diem. That was his old royal typewriter down in his office, and he said, "Here, take this across to the Griffiths property, our neighbor's property, and dump it in their pond." And so, under a full moon, I toted it in a laundry sack and went down our long, lonely gravel driveway. Our house was called Witch's Island, by the way, and it was a creepy-looking place. Lots of unkempt acreage and trees with bony fingers, and this was a particularly scary night. I don't know, my adrenaline was up, so I said sure, and so I took it across the street. And they had this huge property where my mother and I used to go horse riding for hours at a time. That's when we really got close and found out a lot about each other. And I was so grateful for that too. And maybe if Watergate hadn't happened, we had perhaps we would have never come together as we had, because under the state of stress that our family was under, with the FBI following us, I mean, they launched the greatest manhunt in the history of the United States at that time to look for my father, and he was in his house. I guess the FBI is not doing that much better these days with the whole Hillary thing, you know. It's like, you know, we got 650,000 emails, and it looks pretty bad, but we're going to give her a pass. Okay, that's fine. And then my mom came back, and she took up the reins of being my dad's helper. The ironic thing about it is that she was planning to leave my father upon her return. She just had it. It was it. And when she heard about Watergate, everything she warned him about, I remember her saying, Howard, these people are using you. They know you're a patriot. They know you will do whatever it takes for the United States government, for the presidency, for the security of our country. They're using you for their personal needs. This is not a CIA operation. That's a national security operation. This is something else. This is Nixon's kookiness, you know, his paranoia, and that it was. And it's sad because helping my father, it killed her. You know, and she was the go-between for the money that they were blackmailing. Well, to everyone else it was blackmail. To my parents it was money owed because an operation had gone south, and the team members of the operation, their families needed to be taken care of. I mean, the Cubans had big families. We had 4 kids in our family, and bills had to be paid, lawyers had to be paid, medical bills, school bills, private school bills, you know, rent, mortgages, all that stuff. And this was an agreement between my dad's superiors and my dad, which he then passed along through to the people that work for him, the Cubans and McCord and those guys. And so while they were blackmailing Nixon for money, it was so funny though, because when my mom got back, she goes, "Well, what's been going on around here?" You know, shit. What can I tell you? Well, let's see. There's probably a couple $100,000 in an envelope way up in the air conditioning heating ducts, way up there. See the little nylon string you can pull and fish it out. So we went down there, and she was like, "Oh my God." Well, she gave me a nice stack of, I don't know, it was like $6,000 or $7,000, and she goes, "Here, get out of town." And so I did. I'm like, "Well, where do I go? What do you mean?" And she said, "Buy a car and go with your girlfriend and take a tour of the national parks. I don't care where you go, just you got to leave. This is something bad's going to happen here." And I did. When I came back, Watergate had not gone away. It had just gotten worse. Now the press was all over the house, like they do nowadays. You know, cars on the streets, and you know, anybody that came in and out. There was a rush, and you know, it was hard to get stoned and be a hippie and play music in my rock band when all that was going on. You know, it's like, no, out of my face, Woodward and Bernstein. You know, shut up. Sorry. But then everything changed when my mother died. When she got on that plane that was on its way to Chicago. And then my dad was in prison. We were alone in the house. My sister, my brother David, who was only 9. And then William F. Buckley, who was my godfather, came with some goons and said, "We're locking up the house. We're selling the house. You kids have to go. And they grabbed my little brother David out of my sister Lisa's arms and shoved him in the back of a dark sedan. And she was hysterical. My sister Lisa was. I was shouting at Uncle Bill Buckley, and the goons were, you know, looking menacing and threatening, and I think from that point on, I knew that this was really a bad thing. That this was going up beyond anything that I had ever I couldn't even imagine something like this ever happening. And my mom wasn't around to protect us. And then it just seemed to just sort of, I never saw my brother for 6 or 7 or 8, maybe 10 years after that. He was taken down to Miami to live with his godfather, who happened to be in the cocaine business. And at the age of 12, my brother was so addicted to cocaine that he never really recovered. And I really feel bad for him because he was too young to really remember my mom, but he has a scar about something that he can't remember. I don't think that's really fair, you know. And so I've tried to do my best to, you know, I found all these old pictures of my mother, and I made copies and I sent him, and he just called me, and this was only a couple of years ago, and he cried to me on the phone. He goes, saying, "This is so beautiful and wonderful. I wish I could remember." He had no memory of my mother. It's just not fair. He had to be ostracized from the rest of the family, as I was. But I was making decisions on my own. David was just, you know, he was just collateral damage. And that's going to be the subject of a book I'm working on, the collateral damage of families and children from the CIA and the FBI, children of assassins, I was thinking of calling it, you know, because they're just a huge problem there that needs to be looked at and needs to be dealt with. What are these kind of agencies doing to children and families? You know, sending their parents out to do these things, and then, you know, everything goes, you know, FUBAR, and then what? What do the kids do? I went on drugs immediately. I'm like, you know, I'm out of here, and I'm going to start smoking weed. I'm going to do something else, you know. And it just elevated from one drug to the next, and I didn't really realize that was what it was all about. But so my sister and I came across this Rolling Stone article here. I'll pass it around for you guys. But it's interesting because Rolling Stone, right at that time, my dad was in prison and my mother had just passed away. They had a article called written by a noted Chicago investigative reporter, Sherman Skolnick. And yeah, Sherman, great guy. And my sister and I read this article in Rolling Stone, because we were fond of Rolling Stone. And we wrote this short little letter. It said, "We are angry and horrified that you would resort to a cheap journalistic trick of sensationalism by printing the article by Sherman Skolnick. He has no basis for his accusations, and as we understand, he was laughed out of the National Transportation Safety Board meeting. He has no right whatsoever to fabricate wild theories concerning the crash of United Airlines 553. Our mother, Dorothy Hunt, was neither murdered nor was the plane sabotage. If you realize the agony and humiliation this filthy article put us through, you would have thought twice about publishing it. Our mother is dead and cannot defend herself, so have the respect and consideration to let her rest in peace. Lisa and St. John Hunt, Potomac, Maryland, October 11th, 1973. Well, they sent a lady out who was actually a very nice person. Her name was Julia Cameron. She lived with us for the 2 weeks that we had left in the house. Lisa and I were packing things up as best we could, and came out with a story called Life Without Father. And that's me here with the blue jeans and the long hair. That's my sister Lisa. And there's our little house sign, Witches Island. So here, you guys, let's do it. These are very, very old. Here's another one here. Try to be careful with those. The only good thing about that was that Paul McCartney was on the cover, and I knew that he saw the article too. And I'm like, Paul's looking at my article. Cool. So, you know, try to find a little bit of humor or niceness in even the darkest moments of your life is what really is important. And that was the end of it for me. Done. Finished with Watergate, finished with my family. No family left to finish with, but I'm done with everything. Went to a farm in northern Wisconsin, you know, played with my band, and that was the end of it. Eventually time passed. But as time was passing, I noticed I moved to California, and then I saw one afternoon a poster on a telephone pole showing the three tramps, and it's saying this is one of the earliest lectures at SF State, San Francisco State University, given by noted civil rights activist and ex-comedian Dick Gregory. I believe he was going to be on the panel. CIA killed JFK. And there's my dad's picture. And I'm like, what now? You know, what is going on, Papa? He had just been released from prison, of course, because of Watergate. He was no longer a covert operative. He was so overt, it was like ridiculous. He was like, you know, everybody knew his face. Oh, there's that guy. You know, and my father never, and I really never discussed it, although he sent me a couple letters saying if we're ever brought before a Senate Board of Inquiry or something like that, you do remember I was with you that afternoon, right? Yeah, underline. You do remember I was with you that afternoon. Okay. I remember. No. In fact, he was not with me on that afternoon. And I think the day before, or that same day perhaps, my mother was there. I remember her and my brothers and sisters. She said he was in Dallas. Well, I didn't really put anything together, but in later on in years, my father went to trial to protect his name from the accusations. Mark Lane, for one, noted JFK investigator, really one of the earliest guys, aside from Sylvia Meager and Bernard Fensterwall. Those guys really the OGs of the whole JFK assassination thing, so much kudos to them. They really started the ball rolling on all this stuff. 6 Seconds from Dallas was Josiah Thompson. Yeah. But in the early 2000s, my father summoned me, and I've been going to visit him every year or two from California to Miami. As a matter of fact, I visited him in Guadalajara when he moved there. And there's a cute little story in Bond of Secrecy where my father delighted in telling me this story like several times. He goes, you know, Saint, we had a little problem with the neighbor's rooster across the street. Every morning that goddamn rooster would just start blaring and blaring and blaring, and I just said I've got to get rid of that critter. And so he devised this CIA-inspired assassination of the rooster. I'm like, this guy never stops, you know. Got to get rid of this rooster. Okay, how many guys is it going to take? What'd you do, a breaking and entering? Did you make it look like suicide? I mean, roosters kill themselves, right? Yeah, a feed overdose or something. He was bulimic, I don't know, he was something. Depressed, okay, depressed rooster. Anyways, he told me he had, because the rooster cages were on top of this flat-roofed hacienda right across the street. So my father got his slingshot, or manufactured, or got from the CIA a slingshot, and he had melted some